I never thought I'd be standing here in my little kitchen in Kingston, New York, wondering where it all went wrong. My name is Serafina Sarah Calloway, and for 45 years, I've lived a life that was anything but extraordinary. Sure, I had Caden, my pride, my joy, my reason to wake up every morning, but lately it feels like he doesn't see me as his mom anymore. Just a shadow of someone who used to matter. You see, Caden's always been ambitious, driven, the kind of kid who could charm anyone with a smile. But ambition has a way of changing people, and now I'm not so sure I recognize the man he's become. It wasn't always like this. When Caden was younger, we were inseparable. After his father, Elias, walked out on us when Caden was just 5, I poured everything I had into raising him. I worked long hours at the accounting firm downtown, came home to cook dinner, helped him with homework, and tucked him into bed every night. He used to tell me, "Mom, you're my hero." Those words carried me through the hardest days. But now he barely looks me in the eye, and it hurts more than I care to admit. The breaking point came during a family dinner at his fiancée's penthouse in Manhattan. Her name is Vivian Laurent, and she's everything I'm not: polished, poised, dripping in designer clothes and an air of superiority that makes my skin crawl. She invited me to meet her parents, and I thought naively that it would be a chance to reconnect with Caden. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. Vivian spent the entire evening making subtle jabs about my quaint lifestyle, asking if I ever considered pursuing something more fulfilling than accounting. Then came the final blow. As dessert was being served, Vivian casually mentioned their plans to move to London after the wedding. "Of course," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand, "there won't really be room for you in our new home. It's just too small, you understand." I stared at her, my heart sinking, and then I looked at Caden. He didn't say a word. Not one word to defend me. That's when I realized I wasn't part of his future anymore. So I smiled, stood up, and walked away. As I stepped into the elevator, I heard Vivian laugh and say, "She's so pitiful." Caden chuckled awkwardly, and that sound will haunt me forever. Back in Kingston, I found myself staring at the old recipe book my grandmother left me. It was worn and faded, filled with handwritten notes and splatters of flour from decades past. Baking had always been my escape when life got heavy, but somewhere along the way I stopped doing it. Maybe because I was too busy being a mom, or maybe because I convinced myself it was just a hobby, not something worth pursuing. But that night I pulled out my mixer and started baking. Cookies, cakes, tarts. It didn't matter what, as long as my hands were busy and my mind was quiet. The next morning I brought a tray of macarons to the local farmer's market. They sold out in under an hour. People kept asking if I had a bakery, and though I laughed it off at first, the idea began to take root. What if I did open a bakery? What if I stopped living for everyone else and started living for myself? For the first time in years, I felt a spark of excitement. I decided to call it Calloway's Corner. It wasn't much, a tiny pop-up stand in the corner of the market, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of something that had nothing to do with Caden. A few weeks later, I met Liam O'Shea, a widowed chef visiting Kingston on sabbatical. He stopped by my stand one Saturday morning, bought a slice of my lavender honey cake, and told me it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. At first, I thought he was just being polite, but then he started coming back every week, offering tips and encouragement. Liam saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself, that I was capable of more than just surviving. Around the same time, my estranged younger sister, Eloan, reached out to me. We hadn't spoken in years, not since our mother passed away, but she'd heard about my bakery through mutual friends. Over coffee, she told me stories about our mother's struggles, how she'd been abandoned by our father and forced to raise 2 girls alone. Hearing those stories stirred something deep inside me. I realized that I'd spent my entire life trying to protect Caden from the pain I'd endured, but in doing so I'd lost myself. Maybe it was time to stop running from the past and start reclaiming my life. Word about Calloway's Corner spread quickly, and soon I was hosting private events and catering for local weddings. I even caught the attention of a food critic from the New York Times, who wrote a glowing review of my salted caramel éclairs. The exposure opened doors I never imagined possible, including an invitation to compete in the prestigious Paris Patisserie Challenge. The irony wasn't lost on me. Paris was where Caden and Vivian now lived, basking in their glamorous new life. As I prepared for the competition, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come. A year ago, I was just a single mom working a thankless job, invisible to the world. Now I was stepping onto an international stage, proving to myself, and maybe to Caden, that I was more than just someone's mother. Still, the thought of seeing him again filled me with dread. What would he say? Would he even recognize the woman I'd become? The moment I walked into the grand ballroom of the Parisian hotel hosting the gala, I spotted him. Caden looked different, taller, sharper, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth. He was standing beside Vivian, laughing at something she'd said, completely oblivious to my presence. For a second I froze. This was the boy who used to climb into my bed after a bad dream, the boy who once called me his hero. Now he was a stranger. When our eyes finally met, his smile faltered. He excused himself from Vivian and approached me cautiously, as if he wasn't sure whether to hug me or shake my hand. "Mom," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. "I'm competing," I replied. "And winning." His expression shifted, from confusion to embarrassment to something darker. Before he could respond, Vivian appeared at his side, her gaze icy. "Darling, who is this?" she asked, her tone laced with disdain. I didn't wait for Caden to answer. Turning on my heel, I walked away, leaving them both in stunned silence. That night, back in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the look on Caden's face when he saw me. Shock, shame, and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe guilt? Whatever it was, it lit a fire inside me. For years, I'd let him drift away, let Vivian manipulate him into thinking I wasn't enough. But now I had power. And I wasn't going to waste it. It started as a harmless idea, a way to even the score, but the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I remembered how Vivian's family had always flaunted their wealth during that disastrous dinner in Manhattan. Something about them felt off. So I did what I do best, I dug. Using my accounting skills, I combed through public records, tax filings, and offshore account leaks. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. Vivian's father, Henri Laurent, was knee-deep in a money-laundering scheme involving shell companies and illegal real estate deals. The evidence was damning, and for the first time in my life I felt dangerous. I didn't act alone. Liam, who had become both a mentor and a confidant, helped me craft an anonymous tip to a prominent investigative journalist based in Paris. Within days the story broke and the fallout was explosive. Henri Laurent was arrested, his empire crumbling. Overnight, Vivian's perfect world unraveled before my eyes. Her engagement parties were cancelled, her social media turned into a war zone of accusations and insults, and worst of all, Caden lost his job at her family's company. Watching it unfold from afar gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. Every headline, every scandalous detail felt like justice served cold. Yet deep down I knew this wasn't just about Vivian or her family. This was about proving to myself that I wasn't powerless, that I could fight back against the people who tried to erase me. Still, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Was revenge really worth it if it cost me the last shred of connection I had with my son? The guilt hit me hardest late at night, when the adrenaline faded and the silence pressed in. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd gone too far. Caden hadn't reached out, not once. Not after the scandal broke, not after his life imploded. Part of me wanted to call him to explain why I'd done what I did, but another part of me was too angry. Too hurt. He'd chosen Vivian over me. He'd laughed at her cruel words. How could I forgive him for that? Eloane called one evening, sensing something was wrong. "Sarah," she said gently, "you've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. When are you going to take care of yourself?" Her words struck a chord. She was right. I'd always put others first, sacrificing pieces of myself along the way. But this time I wasn't sure I'd done the right thing. Revenge might have felt empowering in the moment, but it left a bitter taste in my mouth. A few weeks later, I received an email from a literary agent who'd read about my rise in the culinary world. She wanted to represent me for a memoir. At first I hesitated. Writing a book meant exposing everything. The sacrifices, the heartbreak, the betrayal. But then I realized, this was my chance to tell my side of the story. To show the world what happens when you push someone to their breaking point. The memoir, titled No Room for Me, became an instant bestseller. In it, I detailed my struggles as a single mother, my complicated relationship with Caden, and yes, the scandals surrounding Vivian's family. Readers ate it up, praising me as a symbol of resilience and empowerment. Meanwhile, Vivian's reputation was in tatters. One day, I received a frantic voicemail from Caden begging me to stop. "You're ruining everything," he shouted before hanging up. I listened to the message 3 times, my hands trembling. Then I deleted it. With the success of my memoir came opportunities one never dreamed possible. Callaway's Corner expanded into multiple locations across Europe, and I became a household name. Chefs invited me to judge competitions. Magazines featured me on their covers. Talk shows begged me to share my story. On paper I had everything I'd ever wanted. But happiness felt fleeting, like trying to catch smoke in my hands. Every time I saw Caden's name in the news, or rather the lack of it, I felt a pang of regret. He'd disappeared from the public eye, retreating to some small town in upstate New York. Rumors swirled that his marriage to Vivian had ended in divorce, leaving him penniless and broken. I tried to convince myself that he deserved it, that karma had finally caught up with him. But the truth was harder to swallow. I missed him. Despite everything, he was still my son. Months passed and I heard nothing from Caden. Until one day, while visiting Kingston for a ribbon-cutting ceremony at my newest bakery location, I spotted him sitting alone on a park bench. He looked thinner, paler, his once confident posture replaced by slumped shoulders and hollow eyes. For a moment I considered walking away. What could I possibly say to him after everything that had happened? But then he looked up and saw me. His expression shifted from shock to shame to something resembling hope. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words broke me. All the anger, all the pain, it melted away in an instant. I sat beside him, listening as he poured out his heart. He told me how Vivian had manipulated him, how her family had used him as a pawn, and how he'd been too blind to see it until it was too late. By the time he finished speaking, tears streamed down both our faces. After that emotional meeting in the park, I couldn't shake the image of Caden sitting there, defeated and lost. It was Liam who finally convinced me to give him another chance. Not out of obligation, but because forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. "Holding on to anger will eat you alive, Sarah," he said one evening as we sipped coffee at my kitchen table. "You've already proven your strength. Now it's time to show compassion." So, reluctantly, I offered Caden a job at one of my bakeries. Not because I felt sorry for him, but because I believed everyone deserves a second chance, even the people who hurt us most. To my surprise, he accepted without hesitation. At first, things were awkward between us. He'd arrive early, stay late, and avoid eye contact whenever possible. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to open up. We started talking again. Small conversations about recipes, customer preferences, and eventually the past. Working together wasn't easy. There were days when old wounds resurfaced, moments when a careless comment or lingering resentment threatened to undo all the progress we'd made. But we kept going one step at a time. Caden threw himself into learning the business, determined to prove he wasn't the entitled, self-centered man I'd accused him of becoming. One evening, after closing the bakery, we sat side by side on the back steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I don't expect you to trust me again, Mom," he said softly. "But I want you to know, I'm trying. For you." His voice broke on the last word and I reached over to squeeze his hand. "I see that," I replied. "And I'm proud of you." It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Just as our relationship began to mend, an unexpected letter arrived in the mail. The envelope bore no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably Vivian's. My stomach churned as I opened it, bracing myself for whatever venom she planned to unleash. Instead, I found a confession, one so shocking it left me reeling. She admitted that she'd orchestrated the entire scandal involving her father's arrest. Not because she cared about justice, but because she wanted revenge against me. "You thought you were ruining my life," she wrote. "But really, I was using you to destroy my own family. They treated me like a pawn, just like they treated Caden. And now, thanks to you, they're paying for it." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. All this time, I'd believed I was taking control of my destiny, but in reality, I'd been playing right into her hands. The revelation shattered me. I spent hours pacing my apartment, replaying every decision I'd made since that fateful dinner in Manhattan. Had I truly sought justice? Or had I simply been another pawn in Vivian's twisted game? The line between revenge and righteousness blurred until I could barely tell them apart. Liam listened patiently as I poured out my fears and doubts. It doesn't matter whose plan it was, he said gently. What matters is what you do next. You can let this consume you or you can use it to grow. His words gave me clarity. Yes, I'd been manipulated, but I'd also taken ownership of my life in ways I never had before. Maybe the journey hadn't been perfect, but it had led me here, to a place where I could choose forgiveness over bitterness, growth over stagnation. The question of whether to retract my memoir weighed heavily on me. On one hand, admitting the truth would mean undoing everything I'd built, the empire, the accolades, the newfound respect. On the other hand, staying silent felt like perpetuating a lie. I wrestled with the decision for weeks, seeking advice from Eloan, Liam, and even Caden. Finally, I made up my mind. Rather than retracting the memoir, I decided to write a follow-up book. A raw, unfiltered account of the complexities of revenge and redemption. In it, I revealed Vivian's role in the scandal not to absolve myself, but to highlight the cyclical nature of pain and the importance of breaking free from it. The response was mixed. Some readers praised my honesty, while others criticized me for exploiting tragedy. But for the first time, I didn't care what anyone thought. This was my story told on my terms. With the success of my second book, I decided it was time to step back from the spotlight. I sold Callaway's Corner to a young entrepreneur eager to carry on its legacy, using the proceeds to fund scholarships for single mothers pursuing entrepreneurship. Felt fitting, a way to honor the sacrifices I'd made while empowering others to chase their dreams. Caden, now managing one of the bakery locations under new ownership, expressed gratitude for the opportunity but admitted he still struggled to understand why I'd forgiven him. I wouldn't have blamed you if you hadn't, he confessed one afternoon. I smiled sadly. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, I told him. It's about letting go of the anger that keeps us trapped in the past. And maybe, giving each other a chance to be better. On a rainy October morning, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in years. Standing there, surrounded by the scent of damp earth and wilting flowers, I reflected on the sacrifices women like her, and me, had made. We gave up pieces of ourselves to build lives for our children, only to watch them drift away. It wasn't fair, but it was real. As I knelt beside the headstone, I whispered a promise. I would continue sharing my story, not to dwell on the pain, but to inspire others to rise above it. Though I'd found peace, I knew some wounds would never fully heal. And that was okay. Life wasn't about erasing scars. It was about learning to live with them. The final scene takes place on a quiet beach in Maine, where I've retreated to write my third book. The waves crash against the shore, their rhythms steady and soothing. I sit cross-legged in the sand, penning the last few lines of my manuscript. Revenge may feel sweet, I write, but it leaves a bitter aftertaste. True strength lies not in destroying those who wronged us, but in rising above them and ourselves. As I close the notebook, I glance out at the horizon, where the sun dips below the water, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. For the first time in years, I feel whole. The release of my third book, Rising Tides, marked the end of an era for me. It wasn't just another memoir. It was a culmination of everything I'd learned about forgiveness, resilience, and the cost of vengeance. Readers responded to it in ways I hadn't anticipated. Mothers reached out to thank me for giving voice to their struggles. Strangers shared stories of their own betrayals and triumphs. Some even credited my words with helping them mend broken relationships or find courage to start over. But not everyone was pleased. Vivian, who had retreated into obscurity after her family's downfall, resurfaced briefly to denounce my books as self-serving propaganda. Her accusations stung, but they no longer held power over me. I realized that her anger stemmed from her inability to forgive herself, a burden far heavier than any I carried. Still, her reappearance served as a reminder that while I'd moved on, others remained trapped in cycles of blame and bitterness. With my writing complete and my bakery empire sold, I found myself at a crossroads. For so long, my identity had been tied to being a mother, a baker, a survivor. Now, without those labels, I felt untethered, free yet uncertain of what came next. Eloan suggested I travel, explore the world beyond Kingston and Paris. "You've earned it," she said with a grin. "Besides, you're too young to retire." I took her advice, embarking on a journey that led me to places I'd only dreamed of. The lavender fields of Provence, the bustling markets of Marrakesh, the serene fjords of Norway. Along the way, I met people whose lives mirrored mine in unexpected ways. Single mothers rebuilding after loss, estranged children seeking reconciliation, widows rediscovering joy. Each encounter reminded me that pain is universal, but so is hope. Months later, I returned to Kingston for Caden's birthday. He'd grown into a man I barely recognized, the kind of person I hoped he'd become. Confident yet humble, passionate about his work, and determined to rebuild his life brick by brick. He greeted me at the door of his modest apartment with a hug that lingered longer than usual. Over dinner we talked about everything and nothing. The weather, his plans to open his own cafe, my travels. When the conversation turned to Vivian, his expression darkened. She reached out recently, he admitted. Wanted to clear the air. His tone was bitter, but there was also a flicker of sadness. What did you say? I asked gently. He shrugged. I told her it was too late. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. I nodded, understanding fully. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And sometimes, moving forward means leaving parts of the past behind. The story ends where it began, with water. Standing on the same beach in Maine where I'd written the final lines of Rising Tides, I let the waves lap at my feet. The ocean has always been a metaphor for life. Unpredictable, vast, ever-changing. Its rhythm soothes me, grounding me in the present moment. As the sun sets, casting the sky in shades of amber and indigo, I reflect on the choices that brought me here. Revenge may have ignited my transformation, but redemption defined it. I think of Caden, Eloan, Liam, all the people who shaped my journey in ways big and small. And I think of my mother, whose sacrifices paved the way for mine. In the distance, a seagull cries, its voice carried by the wind. I close my eyes and whisper a silent prayer, for healing, for grace, for the courage to keep rising. Then, turning away from the sea, I walk toward whatever comes next, knowing that the tides will always carry me home.